Urdu, and they just simply don't get enough Arabic to understand something as sophisticated as the Quran. So along comes the local militant who misappropriates a little scripture, as all religions are guilty of doing from time to time, but misappropriates the scripture to recruit these kids to their cause, and these children are absolutely easy prey. They have no ability to challenge or question, and that's what we're trying to build into them. And I've found, you know, this really works at all levels too, because I can take a madrasa leader, point out how what he's doing at this point in time is actually counterproductive to their best interest, take them through a logic flow to a new conclusion of what they ought to be doing. They can follow that logic, they can embrace the new conclusion, but what they're simply incapable of doing is starting the thought process themselves. It's just things are so tradition bound, if you will, and tribal bound that and we in the West, as do many over there, have a hard time telling where, you know, religion ends and tribalism begins, or vice versa. We thus far have enjoyed pretty significant success. In some respects, we've only hit the tip of the iceberg. We've now reached about 500 to 600 madrasas, but the total universe is probably somewhere in the order of 12 to 15,000. Not even the government knows for certain. Our numbers will grow because we've been taking those workshop participants who show unusual ability, and we've been training them to be trainers themselves. So this thing is going to start snowballing at a much faster pace. Our success, I think, contrasts dramatically with the lack of success that the government of Pakistan has had in the past. There have been several attempts to reform these madrasas, but they've all been refuted. I mean, even in the wake of 9/11, the U.S. gave Pakistan government $100 million for educational reform. But the madrasas, who are independently funded, most of them locally through the poor tax, but also some from money from the Gulf states, they just thumb their noses at it because they are fearful of losing their independence, but they're also fearful of the possible secularization of their curriculums. We, on the other hand, have been able to go in there starting on a very small basis and growing over time, but we've been able to do this in such a way that they feel that this reform effort is theirs and not something imposed from the outside. Now, how we do that is often very simple. It can just simply mean showing them good things and they ask for more. But we give madrasa leaders lots of ownership, and they have lots of good ideas. And one of the things they all seem to care about, I don't care how, you know, there's 5 sects that sponsor these religious schools, and the 2 hardest line are the Wahhabis and Deobandis. And Wahhabi over there is called Ali Hadith. And they're the 2 hardest line, but I don't care which one you're talking about. They all seem to care about the fact that they're not doing the best that they can by the children, by the students. And oftentimes when we get into the child psychology of how kids can learn more effectively and the rest, it often evokes tears from these folks who remember, these madrasa leaders who remember how they as children were either chained or beaten or what have you to improve their memorization skills. So it's a very sensitive area. But beyond doing this in such a way that they feel it's their effort, we also have inspired them with their own heritage. We pointed out how many of the pioneering breakthroughs in the arts and sciences, including religious tolerance, took place under Islam 1,000 years ago. Once they hear this a few times and they start internalizing it and start walking a little taller and saying, hey, maybe we can do better. And so now, with that as background, let me tell you, I'll tell you a few stories. Everybody likes a story. But about a year ago, I took a couple of my board members over with me, and we visited 3 madrasas that had been clearly identified with terrorism. The first one was the Deobandi madrasa in Karachi, outside Karachi. that had long been known as the chief supplier of fighters for both Chechnya and Kashmir, and also had spawned the two most violent anti-Shiite terrorist groups. Now our project director, who's a Pakistani American who spent his youth in Karachi and attended a madrasa himself, was able to interpret some of the posters that we saw posted in this madrasa that were in Urdu. You know, things like, this brings back images of Rwanda, but like things like "crush the cockroaches." The cockroaches are Shia. You know? And one of the great challenges we've had is that our project director is not only American, but he's Shia as well. And we go in some very hard, tough areas where Shia are not terribly welcome. But we get in there, and this is a room full of madrasa leaders, oversight administrators, senior Islamic scholars and the like, and there's a lot of rage in the room. And the rage is there for two reasons. One is U.S. foreign policy, but we were there at the very peak of the Lebanon crisis, and anything that Israel does, we get credit for. So that rage was really directed at us. And so I started out by saying, look, we're not a government organization, nor have we ever received any money from the government. And although it's clear the U.S. may have made some mistakes of late, it's important for you to remember when they intervened on behalf of Muslims in Bosnia, Kosovo, Somalia. I said, left untold in most recitations of Somalia are the more than 100,000 Somali lives that were saved as a result of that humanitarian intervention. And I said, and while you can fairly criticize the United States for operating with a double standard in the Middle East because of our strategic relationship with Israel, so too can you accuse the Arab leaders of operating with double standards, and complain mightily of Israeli mistreatment, but then turn a deaf ear to Palestinian pleas for humanitarian assistance. So I said, everywhere you look, there are double standards driven by perceived national self-interest. I said, but you know, we're not here to talk about that. This was my poor attempt to try to get past the rage. I said, we're here to talk about values that we hold in common. And then I recited several verses from the Quran that I committed to memory, a poor paraphrase of which is, O mankind, God could have made you one had he willed, but he didn't. Instead, he made you into separate nations and tribes that you may know one another, cooperate with one another, and compete with one another in good works. And I said that I and my two colleagues here are here to open the competition in good works. And then we just sort of played to religious values that we hold in common. And by the time this all played itself out, that rage had been converted to a spirit of fellowship. And we then went up to Ali Hadith or Wahhabi madrasa outside of Lahore. It had been identified with the London bombers, and did the same thing with the same effect. At one point, I mentioned too that as it turned out, although we're not a religious organization, we're multi-religious, but the two colleagues I had with me, like myself, were Christians. And I told the group, I said, you know, we happen to be followers of Jesus. And I said, you know, we know that you can't be a good Muslim unless you believe some pretty wonderful things about Jesus. I said, so let's ask ourselves, if he were here today, how would he want us to act toward one another? So this leads into the discussion. And the madrasa leader at the Wahhabi